Hi, everyone, and welcome along to the Ergonomically Speaking podcast, the podcast that aims to help you reduce and even eliminate work related discomfort. I'm your host, Neve Pentney of Boyne Ergonomics. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that you're able to take away some useful practical advice from this podcast to help you reduce your own risk of discomfort at the workplace or help manage the risks among the people that you might be responsible for. So now that we know why we're here, let's get started. Hello, and welcome along to another episode of the Ergonomically Speaking podcast, where today we're taking it out of the office and into the lab. I've been doing a lot of work recently with lab-based employees, conducting assessments, identifying risks, and then working to try and mitigate those risks. And it's a really, really interesting area, so I thought I'd share it with you today. Lab work is an essential part of medical scientific research and the pharmaceutical industry, and the lab-based roles themselves do actually come with a lot of risk factors. Now, obviously, the tasks themselves vary based on the work that's being done, but generally speaking, they all have similar risk factors. So you have static postures, be it sitting or standing, repetitive movements, poor posture, high concentration, high focus, tasks that involve a lot of high precision, fine movements of the fingers and hands, working with chemicals and manual handling. So whether it's, moving equipment around, moving chemicals around, even just stock rotation and getting stock, there's manual handling involved too. The occurrence of musculoskeletal disorders among lab-based workers is really, really well documented. And I've just chosen two quick studies just to kind of give you an idea. But in 2018, Pankala et al. Conducted a study with medical science students. And what they found is that these students, over a third of them reported musculoskeletal discomfort during training in the previous 12 months, with 25% reporting musculoskeletal discomfort in the last 7 days. And what was really, really surprising and also slightly worrying about this study is that it was conducted on students. So these weren't full time lab based employees. These were students who were spending about a sixth of their time in the lab, and they were reporting discomfort before they'd even got into an employment. And the areas where they were reporting discomfort were the hands, the shoulders, the lower back, and the neck. And these findings were kind of echoed more recently. Nalunga et al. In 2023 found that 48.3% of lab based employees reported one or more instances of work related musculoskeletal discomfort in the last 12 months. It is really important if you work in a lab, you manage a lab, that you promote safe ergonomic practices among your employees when you're completing the lab based tasks. And that's what I'm going to look at in this episode. So, we're going to look at the key areas of concern and the tasks that are conducted in the lab, the type of tasks where we see the risk factors like your static postures, repetitive movements, adverse postures, the tasks where we see this, and then what we can do to reduce the risk of musculoskeletal discomfort, fatigue, and stress. So, what I'm going to cover, the work areas, going to have a look at work organization, standing tasks, seated tasks, computer tasks, working at hoods and safety cabinets, working with microscopes, pipetting, and then the manual handling and the movement of equipment. So, these are, as I said before, laboratory based tasks can vary greatly, but these are common areas, common tasks that you see in labs. So most labs will have tasks that are done standing, some that are done seated, some that have the computer, safety hoods safety cabinets and hoods and isolators, microscope work, pipetting, and some level of manual handling. So I feel that by covering these, we can kind of cover most tasks that you would do in a lab. So we're going to just highlight what we can do to reduce the risks associated with lab based tasks. So, if we look first at work organization, so in a lab based setting, having good organization of work, absolutely crucial to reducing the risk of musculoskeletal disorders, stress, and fatigue among lab based employees. what you should do, whether it's the lab manager or whoever's in charge of it, even if it's handled just by the lab based employees themselves, but work should be planned and scheduled and rotation scheduled in a way that allows for breaks and also allows for changes in tasks that have different demands. So there's no point in having a person doing an hour on a highly repetitive task and moving on to the next hour or the next couple of hours in another highly repetitive task. So, say for example, go from one pipetting task to the next pipetting task in the next rotation. The work should be organized that when a person moves from one task to another, there's a different demand. So, for example, somebody could move from a standing task to a seated computer task, then onto a safety hood, that kind of thing. That the demands on the body are different with different tasks, and that should be accommodated within task rotation. And then, of course, allowing for regular breaks and a good bit of variation. It'll help reduce the risk of musculoskeletal disorder, and it will also help reduce some of the monotony. So it makes sure that people are productive, people are alert, and you're less likely to maybe have an accident or an incident. Maintain a tidy workspace. The lab bench themselves should be kept clear of anything that's not supposed to be there. So clear of clutter and anything that's used quite frequently. So your tools, your supplies, your equipment, samples, whatever it may be, should all be kept within arm's reach. So everything you need should be within arm's reach. And there should be no unnecessary clutter on it. And this is to help reduce unnecessary twisting and stretching and bending and reduce the risk of accidental spills or incidents with chemicals or samples on the bench. It's also important that the area in the lab, the general lab area, the floor area, is also clean, is also tidy, that there's no spills, no obstructions, no trailing cables. Again, just to reduce the risk of accident and injury. And within the lab itself, everything should be clearly labeled and color coded, which it will generally be done when it comes to chemical safety, but it's crucial to that chemicals are labeled properly, materials are labeled, so everybody knows what everything is, where it should be, and it will help reduce the time spent looking for items and reduce the risk of any accidents or confusion around chemicals. Next, we're going to move on to standing tasks. So, for tasks that need to be done or can be done in the standing position, if they're going to be standing for prolonged periods, there should be anti fatigue mats in place. So, these mats provide a little bit of cushioning just to reduce the stress on the legs and the lower back. There should also be, and I think this is so important, adjustable lab benches. So the work surface should be adjustable to the appropriate height for each task and each user. So in a lot of lab areas that I would go, it's not always the one task that's being done in the one area. So you could have somebody doing a really high concentration, fine motor task on the bench, and later on, or the next day, or a couple of days in, something might change, and all of a sudden, somebody's doing a piece of work with a large piece of equipment in the same area. And also, you'll have different people working there. So the first person doing a task that day might be 5'2", and the next person on the next rotation might be 6'2". So I think it's incredibly important that benches are adjustable, so they can be brought to the right height for whatever task is being done and whoever is doing that task. Remember, ergonomics fit the task to the person. That's where I think adjustable benches come in and are really important. And rotate your tasks and position. So again, if you have an adjustable bench, well then you should be able to alternate between seated, standing, perching on a high seat, perching on a stool, and this just allows you to reduce the strain on the lower back and the legs by being able to shift out of that static standing position while you're based in that work area. And of course, take your breaks, walk around 1 or 2 minutes just to give your muscles a break and improve your circulation. Seated tasks can also be really physically demanding, as demanding as standing. What you want to try and do is if somebody is doing a task in a seated position, the chair they're using should be adjustable. So height adjustable, good adjustable lumbar support, and comfortable padding. The chair should be adjusted when the person is changing and starting the task, and also the height of the bench. Make sure that they're the right height for the person doing the task and the task that they're doing to try and keep good alignment of your arms and legs. And I think it's incredibly important. You have to remember in a lab, nobody or rarely, very rarely, would somebody have an assigned work area. So most work areas, whether they're seated or whether they're standing, are multi-user. With that in mind, I always recommend having good footrest available at any work area because, again, you could have somebody who's 5'2" and somebody who's 6'2" doing the same task in the same area. Footrests mean that whether the desk is fixed in height or adjustable in height or seated or standing, anyone doing the task can have a good level of stability underfoot. And I do think it's so important to highlight that if you have ever seen the high counter, the high bench chairs that have the foot ring around the bottom, the foot rings are adjustable height and that's great. However, they should be used for getting in and out of the chair. They shouldn't be used for stability underfoot when you're seated. Because if you've ever sat in one, or if you've ever looked at somebody sitting in one thing you'll notice is when they have their foot on the foot ring, even if it's at the right height, the ankle is behind the knee. And this can lead to an increased workload in the hips and the lower back, and also decreased circulation in the lower legs, having your foot behind your knee. If you are seated, your ankle, should be under your knee or slightly ahead of your knee. And that's for stability. That means that you can remain seated, back against the backrest, lumbar support in a comfortable, stable position, reducing the workload on your hips and back. So I think footrests are crucial. And I'm not talking of the standard kind of office footrest that you see. There will be some areas of the lab where they will be fine. But what can work really well, especially in areas with high benches and high counters, is there is a foot pedal adjustable footrest that you can get where all you do is you press a little button on top of the footrest with your foot and you can change the height of the footrest based on who's using it and whether you're sitting or whether you're standing. And they are great. They're really adjustable. They come up to a nice, good height and you can adjust them without bending under the table, which is brilliant. And as with the standing work, make sure you're taking your micro breaks. Stand up, walk, stretch quite frequently, at least every 45 minutes. I would go at every 30 minutes, to be honest, and more if we can, because some lab-based tasks are really demanding on the upper body. But just to relieve tension and improve circulation and to give your eyes a break as well from the high focus tasks. If you're doing computer-based tasks, the same principles apply as would in an office. So the chair should be adjustable. Ideally, in the ideal world, the desk should be adjustable. There should be a footrest available. You should be able to adjust the height of the monitor. So either have it on an adjustable stand or have an adjustable monitor on a stand, just so whoever's using it can get the screen to eye level. Make sure there's a keyboard and mouse, that people are not just using the laptops to do DSE tasks. There should be a screen, there should be a keyboard, there should be a mouse. If the work involves paper-based work, so your people are writing results on paper or taking paper results and entering on screen, there should be a writing slope available so that the paper can be positioned appropriately to reduce the strain on the neck. And users should adjust their position. So make sure their feet are on a stable surface, be it the floor, be it a footrest. Elbows level or slightly over the keyboard, looking straight ahead of the screen. So taking the couple of minutes to adjust the workstation when you first start to use it. And if you're in charge of a lab, obviously you need to make sure that they have the equipment that they need to be able to do that. The next area I look at is working at hoods and safety cabinets. So for anyone who's not really sure what they are, there's a few different ones based on what the task is, but usually you've got your unit, then you've got either a full glass partition in front of it with an area for putting your hands into gloves, or it might be half partition where your face is blocked by glass or perspex and you can put your hands in underneath. But usually The hood or the safety cabinet should be at a comfortable height to avoid unnecessary strain. The one issue I say with a lot of hoods and safety cabinets is they're not very adjustable. A lot of them. Um, so a lot of it, we're trying to get the lab workers to kind of adjust themselves around it, but we always see what we can do. Some of the newer ones can be adjusted a little bit better than the older ones. But if you can, make sure it's at a comfortable height. Use adjustable stands if needed. Adjust the hood or the cabinet sash if you can. So position it at a good height that you're reducing the strain on the arms and the neck. Use a footrest. So elevating the feet sometimes can relieve pressure on the lower back when you're working with a hood, but it depends very much on the hood and the task that you're doing. Make sure there's good ventilation so that we don't have poor quality air because that can lead to discomfort and health issues. And really, with the hoods, what we want to do is limit the time spent working on it. As I've said, a lot of them, especially the older ones, are not very adjustable. And it is sometimes a case of the lab user adjusting themselves to the hood or the safety cabinet. And because of that, again, depending on the person's stature, some people are absolutely fine and display really, really good neutral postures, but some people don't. And if we can't, you're quite limited in what you can do with them sometimes. If you can't adjust them to the person, well, then you have to try and minimize their exposure. And this will come back to your work organization and your planning that whoever is on that area is not there for too long. The next area we're going to look at is your microscopes. So, with the microscopes, and again, this is where adjustable benches can come in really, really handy because they can reduce that forward bending. But where you can, try and maintain an upright position. So try and keep your back straight and have your head aligned with the microscope's eyepiece. Use an adjustable microscope stand. So if the bench itself is not adjustable, or even if it is, having that extra adjustable stand makes sure that you can get the microscope at a comfortable height and angle for yourself, and make sure you have good lighting. So make sure your microscope is well lit, so you're avoiding eye strain, and avoid glare on the lenses and use extra task lighting, extra lamps if you need to reduce eye strain, and take your regular breaks. Microscope tasks can be quite demanding on the upper back and neck and eyes. So make sure you are taking breaks. I will say most of the microscope based tasks that I will assess, they're not usually done for prolonged periods. It's usually that they're done for kind of short periods, but for a long time, quite frequently. So make sure you're taking your regular breaks. And pipetting. Now, pipetting is a really, really common task in the lab, and it's probably the one task I see, aside from the hoods, that can actually, where people feel it. The people feel it in their wrists and the fingers and the hands and the elbows, the upper limbs. So if done incorrectly, or with the wrong equipment, or with poor equipment, pipetting is, I would consider, quite a high risk task. So, firstly, use ergonomic pipettes. So, choose a pipette that has been designed with ergonomics in mind. So, it has an adjustable plunger force, it has a comfortable grip to try and reduce the strain on the hands and the wrists, the work that the fingers and the hands need to do the pipetting task. Practice good pipetting technique. So make sure you're using the right finger positions and you're applying minimal force when pipetting. Alternate the hands as well, if possible. Now, I do find some right handed people struggle to pipette with the left hand. It is something you should practice because being able to switch between hands can reduce the muscle fatigue and repetitive strain on the dominant hand. I do find left handed users switch a little bit easier between the left and the right hand because obviously they've had to adjust to a right-handed world, but right-handed users tend to be very right-handed. So if you work in a lab and you're going to be doing pipetting tasks or it's part of your job, I would practice pipetting with the left hand because it just means you can reduce strain on the right hand or your dominant hand. And avoid overreaching. So keep your samples, keep your pipettes, keep your equipment within very easy reach so that you're not stretching. And even though pipetting is repetitive, we want to reduce the degree of movement where we can, that you're not stretching and excessively moving and straining. because that can really cause some cumulative disorders down the line. And make sure the pipettes are regularly calibrated to make sure they're accurate and they're easy to use and they're not stiff. Because pipetting, as I said, I do find it's quite a high risk task if done incorrectly. And if you are doing it, you want your pipettes to be accurate and you want them to be easy to use with minimal force and comfortable to hold. So make sure they're regularly checked and calibrated. And the last area we look at then is your weighing and manual handling lab equipment. So handling lab equipment like scales, balances, centrifuges, that kind of thing requires very careful attention. So if you're using lab equipment, try where you can to keep it at waist level. You're trying to keep it at a comfortable working position so you're not kind of awkwardly bending or having to lift the shoulders. Especially like the likes of the centrifuges. If you're loading centrifuges, it should really be at waist level to try and keep kind of awkward postures to a minimum. If you're doing manual handling, if you're moving, even if it's just bringing stock in and out and chemicals in and out, use carts and trolleys. If you're moving equipment, and I say heavy equipment, but heavy is quite a subjective term. If you're moving equipment or boxes or chemicals, bottles of chemicals that feel heavy to you, use carts and trolleys to move it around and ask for help. If something feels either awkward to move, heavy to move, request assistance always. Do not try and do it yourself. And observe good technique. So obviously, if you are lifting, especially from like floor level or lower than waist level, bend your knees, keep your load close to your body. Don't twist the spine while you're lifting. Point the feet in the direction you want to go and where you want to place the load before you place it. Know where you're going with a load. Quick scan of the area. Are there any trip hazards? Is there any spills? Just make sure you know where you're going, you know how you're going to get there, and you know where you're going to put the load. And by paying attention to things like the work organization, the workflow, the work rotation, adjusting the workstations, and just following these very, very kind of general ergonomic guidelines, you can reduce the risk of musculoskeletal injuries, discomfort, fatigue, and stress. And this will help to make sure that you or your employees in the lab are healthy, productive, and able to carry out the tasks. Labs can be very, very demanding and they can be areas of high stress. So you do need to make sure you have the right equipment, the right environment, and the right practices in place that everyone can stay healthy and well. That was just a general overview of things you can do to reduce the risk in a lab-based environment with lab-based tasks. As always, there's a blog related to this episode that's going to be up on my website. If you want to see some images, I will put the link to it in the show notes. The links to all my social media accounts are in the show notes as well as my email address. If you do want to get in touch to maybe suggest an episode you'd like me to cover or with any comments, you can do so through any of those channels. I'm always happy to hear from people. And until next time, everybody, stay well.